Ex-cons of Reddit. What was the hardest prison habit to break after being released? I was locked up for 6 years as a youth. I was a gang member in Los Angeles and wasn't a very nice person in the late 80s and 90s. To this day, I avoid crowds and open seating areas for eating. When I go out with my wife to eat at a restaurant, I always sit facing the room so I can see everything, and I sit at the edge of the booth with one leg on the outside so I can get up quickly, or on the edge of my chair if I'm seated in a chair. All the while, I am scanning the room, memorizing faces, categorizing people as threat or no threat. I listen to as many conversations around me as I can within earshot, trying to identify potential dangers while simultaneously following the conversation at my own table. My preference, of course, is for there to be no conversation at my table, just eating quickly and quietly. Even the act of a waiter or waitress interrupting me mid-meal to ask how things are is extremely stressful because it disrupts everything else I'm tracking around me. Obviously, this isn't normal behavior, so I try hard to make it all work and look normal, but inside, I'm literally waiting for trouble to arise. Another habit I had was when my wife and I first moved in together. She didn't realize that moving around me while I slept was a big deal. I would be sound asleep, and she would walk by the bed, and just the rustling of her pajamas or a crack of her toe across the room was enough to wake me instantly. If she was close enough to the bed, I used to grab her and ask what she was doing before I even fully processed it, usually with a fist cocked back. Thankfully, this doesn't happen anymore, but the first 5 to 6 years of our relationship were rough. Where I was locked up, we lived in large dorm rooms with 25 to 30 people per room, and you were a target for anyone who wanted to attack you while you slept. Naturally, I slept lightly and perceived any sound as a potential threat. Story 2. I just spent 19 months with my fiancé, who served 10 years in prison, and over that time I noticed several habits that were clearly ingrained in him from his time inside. For example, he tends to wolf down his food incredibly fast because in prison you're forced to eat in about 5 minutes. He also has this habit of knocking on the table when he gets up, a signal back in prison to show I'm done and leaving the table. He has really sharp reflexes and can respond to the smallest things in an overly aggressive, in-your-face way. I've been working with him on this and other behaviors that were essential in prison but don't translate well to life outside, especially in a relationship. Another thing I noticed is that whenever we watch a program, he makes really crude remarks, as if he's still hanging out with all the guys inside. I guess the unspoken rule in prison is that whoever can cut up the best during a movie or show gets the most attention. He definitely comes up with some clever lines, but they're rarely the kind of comments a woman wants to hear. He also has a tendency to drag everything out, wasting time. In prison, there's no choice. Time is abundant, and you're left with little else to do. In the real world, however, time is limited. You have work, responsibilities, and commitments, and sometimes he spends far too long on minor things without getting to what really matters. It's as if he's become a hermit who likes to create little projects to pass the time, forgetting that now he doesn't have 10 years to burn. There's also a hyper-territorial streak. He becomes overly protective of even the smallest possessions. In prison, that tiny bit of space you have becomes your whole world, so it makes sense that even insignificant items take on huge importance. Outside, however, that same behavior is unnecessary and can be irritating. One of the more concerning changes I noticed was a residual, internally hostile attitude towards certain things. What could be seen as subtle prejudice. Not that he's unkind, he will stop and help anyone, regardless of race if they're in need, but the mental habits he developed in prison about how he views the world are still present, and that's something we've had to work on together. Understanding the culture and pressures of prison helps explain why he developed these habits. Still, on the outside, these behaviors are not welcomed, and he has had to consciously unlearn many of them. It's been a long process, but he has made noticeable improvements. Prison leaves its mark, and even the most kind-hearted people can emerge with patterns that make everyday life outside a challenge. Adjusting takes patience, understanding, and effort from both the person and those who care about them. Story 3. In Pennsylvania, at least in Philly and the surrounding area, we used to make cheese in jail. They were essentially a cheesy noodle dish, mixed with whatever meats and vegetables we could find, and usually served rolled up. It was a small, creative ritual that made the daily grind a little more bearable, and everyone who pitched in got a share of the final creation. I'd make it using cheese puffs, Cheetos, or something along those lines, along with ramen noodles, and then whatever other ingredients you or the other girls had. Usually, I'd team up with anyone willing to contribute to a chi-chi. We'd all add something, and in the end, everyone got a share of the final creation. This was fairly common since I didn't always have all the ingredients needed for a chi-chi or anything else to mix in. Meats, sausage, tuna, and chili. Vegetables. I rarely used any in my chi-chis since they were hard to come by. On the lunch tray, our so-called salad usually consisted of a small handful of wilted lettuce, a few soft onion chunks, and if you were lucky, a single slice of tomato that looked like it had seen better days. Sauce was optional, but always a big deal. We usually tossed in the seasoning packet that came with the noodles, though many girls saved theirs or used only part of it to stretch it further. Those little packets were a blessing, turning the bland meat and pasta from the trays into something halfway edible. We also used hot sauce or barbecue sauce when we could, and sometimes made honey mustard by mixing 2 packets of mayonnaise with one of yellow mustard, then adding 1 or 2 packets of sugar. It sounded weird, but it actually tasted really good. Cooking, though, was a whole different challenge. There were no microwaves, so we used the bathroom sinks for everything. Cooking, making coffee, brushing our teeth, shaving, even trying to get drinkable water. It was disgusting, honestly. The sinks always smelled like rotten eggs, and no matter how much we cleaned them, the smell clung to the walls. There was just one water fountain for all 80 girls, and we could only use it during the 4 hours of dayroom time. It clogged and overflowed so often that it was broken at least once a week. They gave us powdered drink mixes with every tray, breakfast, lunch, and dinner, but they caused UTIs, so I only drank them when I got the grape one. When it came to cooking, we got creative. I'd clean out one of the huge tortilla chip bags from the commissary, the kind that was worth its weight in gold. I'd pour the noodles and water inside the bag and use a Tupperware container, another commissary essential, to hold it while cooking or storing food. Then I'd run the bathroom sink until the water was as hot as it could get. Sometimes it was barely warm, especially if the other girls were showering. Once it was hot, I'd fill the bowl and place the bag of noodles inside. When the water cooled, I'd dump it and refill it again, repeating the process until the noodles softened. Sometimes it took 5 minutes, other times 35. When the noodles were finally ready, I'd crush up cheese curls or whatever I had on hand and mix them into the noodles along with meats, sauces, or any extras I could find. Then I'd stir everything together, flatten it out, and roll it up, cutting it into slices for everyone who pitched in. Sometimes, I didn't even bother rolling it up, I just served it straight from the bowl. That's how we managed to create something that actually felt like a real meal in jail. Commissary was a blessing in disguise. I was lucky enough to have amazing parents who always kept money in my books and made sure I could call home. Most of what I used came from the commissary, and thanks to that, I ate better than most. I was also fortunate to have one of the higher-paying jobs inside. I'm a barber and stylist, so I worked in hair care, cutting and styling for the other girls. I made $17.50 a week, which might not sound like much, but in there, it made all the difference. It bought me food, clothes, hygiene items, and, most importantly, a small sense of control in a place where control was hard to come by. Every time I made a chi-chi, it reminded me that even in the harshest places, people find ways to make something good, to share, to laugh, to create comfort where there isn't any. It wasn't just food, it was a little taste of freedom. Story 4. I get asked this question often, largely because of the circumstances I found myself in, and I've answered it many times, especially for my friends and family. My goal has always been to help them understand me, people like me, and the situation in general. When I was placed in seg in 1999, I'd already been incarcerated for almost 5 years, including a few months in similar conditions, though none carried the looming prospect of spending the remainder of my 25-year sentence there. Those relatively minor stints were enough to shake me, and I realized early on that I would need to actively protect my long-term health and sanity. I quickly determined to focus on routines and habits that could sustain me, both mentally and physically. I read constantly, thanks in large part to some incredible friends who were college students at the time and welcomed my curiosity. Their encouragement allowed me to explore subjects I had never considered before, expanding my mind and broadening my horizons. What began as a necessity became a passion, a way to maintain purpose and clarity. I refused to judge a book by its cover, both literally and figuratively. In addition to cultivating my literary interests, I developed a deep hunger for information about the world still unfolding beyond those walls, a world I hoped to somehow survive long enough to witness again. Thanks to my relatively good behavior, I was allowed a small radio, and I listened intently to NPR and any other programs that offered something worthwhile. I also maintained an average of 20 newspaper and magazine subscriptions, which kept me informed about current events, politics, and more. This allowed me to engage in thoughtful, meaningful conversations with my family and friends during our 2-hour weekend visits, conversations I somehow managed to sustain consistently throughout my entire time inside. I also enrolled in and completed several correspondence courses, which gave me a sense of accomplishment, almost defiantly proving that I could still achieve something positive and lasting in my life. Additionally, I developed a modest knack for writing, whether in correspondence or for creative expression. Through this, I reconnected with old friends in new ways, and it became surprisingly therapeutic for both my family and me, offering a form of communication unmarred by the years of conflict and disregard that had defined much of our interactions before my incarceration. And finally, I exercised intensely. My routine served both their obvious physical benefits and as a vital time sink to structure my days. 6 days a week, roughly 3 hours a day, I alternated between upper and lower body workouts. I experimented with exercises I read about in publications I received, constantly seeking to break up the monotony and counteract the effects of being confined to such a small space. Many men around me were in poor shape, their discomfort palpable, and I feared falling into their shuffling, beaten-down rhythms. I wanted to preserve whatever semblance of good health I could, giving myself a chance not only to endure that environment, but to thrive once I returned to the outside world. In short, I read a lot, wrote a lot, and exercised a lot. It was all I could do, and I did it relentlessly. Story 5. I had to completely change my sense of time after getting out. Inside, time didn't move like it does here. It stretched, folded, and sometimes seemed to stop entirely. I agree with everyone who said they ate super fast, but then we would slow walk back from the chow hall, taking any excuse we could find to spend just a few extra minutes outside. That short walk was one of the few moments that felt close to freedom, the open air, the faint sound of wind and the distant sky above the fences. You didn't rush those minutes because they reminded you of what was waiting beyond the walls. In there, life was about surviving long stretches of emptiness. You had to learn to control time before it controlled you. Every day was the same. Count after count, meal after meal, the same faces, the same walls. I started noticing that I couldn't waste good things by mixing them. If I had a snack, I ate it slowly, focusing on it completely. The taste, the texture, even the sound of the wrapper, it all mattered. That small moment was mine, and I wasn't going to rush it. If there was something good on television, I gave it my full attention. That was my 1 hour of escape. I didn't eat while watching, didn't talk, didn't move. I just let it happen because in there you didn't want good things to pass quickly. You wanted to stretch them out and make the hours disappear in the process. Now that I'm out, everything feels reversed. Time moves too fast. I multitask constantly. I'll snack while watching a movie, scroll through my phone while talking, or eat while reading something. There aren't enough hours in the day. On the inside, I was trying to make hours and days go away. Out here, I'm chasing them, trying to fit more into every second. It took me months to understand how normal people manage their days. They rush to work, rush through lunch, rush home, and still feel like they're running behind. I sometimes catch myself wishing I could teach them how to slow down, how to just be still, but then I realize they've never had to learn that skill. They've never had to sit in silence for hours, waiting for nothing to happen. I've got a good job now, and a group of respectable friends. My coworkers see me as reliable, calm, and focused. I blend in pretty well, but there's a part of me that still reacts differently, sharper, faster, especially when something feels tense or uncertain. In a confrontation, I still move before I think. I'm quick to assess, quick to act. I've had to learn how to pull back at the very last moment, to breathe before responding. Most people I know don't even have that kind of reflex, because for them, danger isn't something they expect. For me, it used to be a way of life. That's probably one of the hardest things to unlearn. Inside, hesitation could hurt you. Out here, overreacting can ruin you. It's a strange adjustment, Being in a world where people don't think in terms of survival. My friends debate, argue, and get frustrated, but they never think about things escalating. For me, that possibility still lingers, even when I don't want it to. Sometimes I'll notice little things that no one else does. I automatically scan for exits when I enter a room. I keep an eye on people's hands, their posture, and their tone. I watch body language without meaning to. It's like my brain still runs background checks on everyone around me. Even when I tell myself I'm safe, that instinct doesn't switch off. I suppose that's the kind of awareness that never really leaves you. The world outside has a strange kind of noise. Cars, phones, people talking fast, screens flashing. At first, all that sound made me uneasy. I used to crave silence because in there, quiet could mean safety. Now, I've had to relearn that noise can also mean life. That laughter, traffic, and music are just part of normal days. Still, I struggle with what to do with my free time. Freedom itself feels unfamiliar sometimes. I'll catch myself pacing without reason, checking doors before bed, or sitting in the dark thinking about nothing. Old habits, old patterns. The hardest part isn't forgetting the past. It's convincing your body that the rules have changed. But I try. Every day, I make small choices that remind me I'm out now. I take slow walks not because I have to, but because I can. I stop to enjoy a warm meal, a cup of coffee, or a quiet morning without shouting or noise. I take deep breaths and tell myself that I don't need to be ready for anything all the time. I remind myself that safety isn't about watching everything, it's about trusting something, even if just for a little while. People ask what the hardest prison habit is to break. For me, it isn't about eating fast or scanning rooms. It's about time, how you feel it, how you spend it, how you trust it again. Inside, time was the enemy, something to survive. Out here, it's something I'm still learning to live with. Freedom isn't just walking out of the gate. It's realizing you no longer have to rush or hide from the clock. Story 6. It wasn't me, but a guy who used to work for me a few years back. He was one of those quiet, dependable types, the kind who never caused trouble, showed up on time, and got his work done without ever needing much supervision. At first, nothing about him stood out, except for one odd little habit that caught my attention. Whenever things got busy at work, I would often go out and grab carry-out lunch for everyone. It was sort of my way of keeping morale up. Just something to show appreciation for my team when we were all buried in tasks. Usually, we'd gather around the break table, unwrap our food, and eat together for a few minutes before jumping back into the grind. But this one guy, let's call him Mark, had this strange way of eating. He would devour his entire meal in less than 2 minutes. I mean literally, 2 minutes flat. Cheeseburger, fries, drink, gone. While the rest of us were still unwrapping our food or chatting about the day, he'd already be done, crumpling up his wrappers and wiping his hands like it was nothing. The first few times I noticed it, I thought maybe he was just in a hurry or had something urgent to get back to. But he did it every single time. No matter what the meal was, no matter how relaxed everyone else seemed, he always ate like the food was about to be taken away from him. One day my curiosity finally got the better of me. I asked him about it. "Hey Mark," I said half-jokingly, "you ever actually taste your food? You eat faster than anyone I sip ever seen." He looked at me for a second, gave this small half-smile, and said, "Well boss, I spent 7 years in a federal prison. If you didn't eat your meal in 10 minutes, you didn't get anything, and that 10 minutes often included the time you spent standing in line to get your food." He said it so calmly, almost casually, like he was talking about the weather. Then he went back to wiping his hands and stood up to throw away his trash. I didn't really know what to say to that. Okay then, I managed to mumble, and I never brought it up again. But his words stuck with me. I started to think about what that must have been like, to live in a place where even eating, one of the most basic human acts, came with tension, time pressure, and the fear of missing out on something as simple as a meal. In that kind of environment, eating wasn't about pleasure or taste, it was about survival. It's strange how prison changes a person in ways that most of us would never notice or understand. For me, eating was always just a routine part of the day, something to enjoy, to take my time with. But for him, it was an ingrained behavior shaped by years of conditioning. He wasn't rushing because he was hungry or impatient. He was rushing because deep down, he still lived by rules that no longer applied. Over time, I noticed other little things too. He never liked sitting with his back to the door. He kept his workspace neat, almost military style, everything in precise order. He was polite, but distant, never sharing too much about his personal life. Yet, he was also one of the hardest workers I'd ever met. Steady, disciplined, and focused. It made me realize something. People talk about freedom as if walking out of prison gates makes you free again, but that's not really how it works. Freedom is physical, yes, but mental freedom takes much longer. For someone like Mark, every small habit was a shadow of where he came from. Eating fast, watching people's movements, keeping things organized. These weren't quirks. They were survival instincts that refused to fade. After that conversation, I never teased him about his eating again. In fact, I stopped paying attention to it altogether. But every once in a while, when I saw him finish his meal before anyone else, I couldn't help but think about what those 7 years must have done to him, not just physically, but mentally. Sometimes, the hardest prison habits to break aren't the ones people expect. They're not the big, dramatic behaviors. They're small, quiet things, like scarfing down a cheeseburger in 2 minutes flat because somewhere inside, a part of you still believes time is limited and comfort is temporary. Mark never talked much about his past after that, and I never asked. But I respected him more than ever. He carried himself with a kind of quiet strength, shaped by things I could never fully understand. And while I'll never know exactly what those years took from him, I could see in those little habits, in the speed of his eating, the alertness in his eyes, the way he moved, that he was still in some way living by the rules of a place he'd long left behind. Story 7. When I first started dating my ex, I noticed something strange about the way he slept. At first, I brushed it off as a quirky habit or maybe just the way he felt most comfortable. But after a few weeks, I realized there was nothing ordinary about it. Every single night, without fail, he would lie down flat on his back, pull the blanket neatly up to his chest, and cross his arms tightly over his torso. He looked as if he were lying in a coffin. He wouldn't move the entire night, no shifting, no rolling over, no stretching. At first, I thought it was just his natural sleeping style. But as time went on, I started to realize it wasn't just that. There was a certain tension in the way he slept, a kind of practiced stillness, like someone who'd been trained to stay perfectly still for a reason. He wouldn't even breathe heavily or snore. It was as if his body had memorized this rigid form and refused to let go. One night, curiosity got the better of me. I asked him why he slept like that. He hesitated, clearly uncomfortable, and then muttered, "It's just how I got used to sleeping. It's safer that way." I didn't understand what he meant at first. Safe from what? The way he slept suddenly made sense. In prison, he said, sleeping could be one of the most dangerous parts of the day. You didn't just drift off peacefully. You had to stay aware, even in your rest. He told me how in crowded cells, people would take things from each other. Food, cigarettes, shoes, even blankets, while others were asleep. And worse, if you didn't keep your body guarded, you could wake up to something far worse than missing possessions. So, he learned to sleep on his back, arms crossed tightly, his body in a position that would let him react quickly if something happened. "It's steps not like anyone taught you that," he told me once. "You just pick it up. The less you move, the less attention you draw. The quieter you are, the safer you stay." That hit me harder than I expected. I began to see his sleeping position not as something odd, but as a sign of survival. Years of living in fear and constant awareness had trained his body to be ready, even in his sleep. For months, he couldn't shake it. I would wake up in the middle of the night, look over at him, and he'd still be in that same position, arms crossed, chest rising and falling softly, as if frozen in time. Sometimes I'd place my hand on his arm or shoulder just to feel him there, but he wouldn't stir. It was eerie and sad because it reminded me that even though he was free, part of him was still stuck behind those walls. There were nights when he'd jolt awake suddenly, breathing hard, his eyes scanning the room like he was back inside. I learned not to reach for him too quickly when that happened. He needed a few seconds to realize he wasn't there anymore. I'd just sit up, whisper, and let him come back to the present on his own. Living with him taught me something about how deeply prison life embeds itself into a person's body and mind. It wasn't just the way he slept, it was how he ate, how he moved, how he spoke. He never turned his back fully to a door, even when we were home. He'd always sit facing the entrance, scanning every few minutes without even realizing it. When we went to restaurants, he'd choose the seat with the best view of the exits. He'd eat quickly, not as fast as others I'd heard about, but still with a quiet urgency, as though meals were something to get through, not to enjoy. But of all those habits, the sleeping one lingered the longest. Even after months of being home, after countless reassurances that he was safe, he still slept like that. I sometimes wondered if a part of him even wanted to change it. Over time, though, the walls began to come down. It started slowly. One night, I woke up and noticed his arm had shifted slightly. Another night, he was lying half on his side. It wasn't much, but it was something. Eventually, he began to roll over during sleep, just like anyone else. The first morning I saw him sprawled out diagonally across the bed, arms loose, face buried in the pillow, I couldn't help but smile. It felt like a small victory, not for me, but for him. It had taken months for his body to unlearn that instinct, for his mind to finally believe he was safe. That simple act of sleeping freely, something most people take for granted, was a quiet but powerful symbol of healing. Sometimes when we'd talk about it, he'd laugh and say, "I guess I finally stopped sleeping like Dracula." But beneath the humor, I could see the weight of what that change really meant. It wasn't just about how he slept, it was about how he lived, how he slowly found his way back to the rhythm of normal life. People often talk about ex-cons and the crimes they committed, but few talk about the habits they carry long after release, habits born from fear, control, and survival. To him, crossing his arms and lying still wasn't strange. It was instinct, protection, safety. The world outside had moved on, but his body hadn't. It took patience, time, and trust to change that. Story 8. There's one thing about my dad that always stands out. It is literally impossible to sneak up on my dad. He went to prison 3 different times and it really shows. He's a small dude, but I know men twice his weight who say, "I wouldn't mess with that guy. He's a crazy mother of fur." In his first few weeks out of prison for the last time, he and my mom had to sleep in separate beds. She'd put an arm around him, and he'd throw her across the room and reach for a shank that wasn't there. You enter a room too fast, and he'd stand to his feet in an instant. If you walk next to him, he'll eyeball you every few seconds to see what you're doing. Another thing is my dad will get very quiet at odd times. A far-off look in his eye. I've learned not to say anything to him when he does this. He gets very irritated if you break him out of it. I've never tried to ask what he's thinking about, and I'm not sure I want to know. He has 2 knife wounds, one in his side, under his rib cage, and a slash across his back. Both look badass, but also like they hurt. He got both in the shower, and they are why he's hard to sneak up on. My conclusion? My dad is a stone-cold dude with a loving heart and an odd sense of humor. Story 9. I had to completely change my sense of time. When you're inside, everything is regimented, measured in moments that feel like both an eternity and a blink of an eye. Meals, recreation, work, everything happens at the same time every day, and yet it somehow drags on endlessly. I remember all the people who said they ate their meals super fast, inhaling every bite. I get it now because that speed was survival. But then we would slow walk back from the chow hall, finding any excuse for a few extra minutes outside just to feel a sense of freedom, however small. Even something as simple as lingering in the sun or watching the wind move across the yard felt like a rebellion against the walls around us. Inside, I made sure I never consolidated enjoyment. If I had a snack, I ate it and truly concentrated on it, savoring every texture and flavor. If there was something good on TV, I would sit there and watch it without letting my mind wander. Time felt like it could stretch or collapse depending on how much attention you paid to the small things. Now, outside, I snack while watching a movie because there aren't enough hours in the day. I don't have the luxury of slowing life down in that same way, but back then my goal was to make hours and days disappear, to escape the reality of incarceration, even if only for a moment. I also learned a kind of heightened awareness that has stayed with me. Even in ordinary situations, I tend to react faster and more decisively than the people around me. Violence, thankfully, is rarely a tool I need, but I notice that my instincts are sharper. If a confrontation arises, I size up the situation quickly, understand the threat, and prepare myself mentally and physically. I can pull back at the last moment when it's not necessary to escalate. But I know my body and mind are ready to act if they have to be. Most people don't have that preparedness, that underlying sense of calculation and self-protection, and it's clear that they simply don't operate on the same level of constant vigilance. Even the smallest things changed. I learned to appreciate solitary moments, the quiet time that seemed impossible in the dorm-style living we had. Sleeping lightly became second nature. Even now, loud noises can startle me, and I sometimes wake up earlier than I need to, ready for anything the day might bring. I still notice patterns in people's movements, their tones, and their expressions, a habit born from years of scanning for threats, both real and perceived. At first, this made normal life feel strange. I couldn't relax the way my friends do. I had to consciously remind myself that most people are not going to harm me, that I don't need to be in survival mode anymore. At work, these habits serve me in unexpected ways. I have a good job now, and my friends are respectable and trustworthy. I don't need to be constantly alert, but I find that I still move efficiently through challenges. If something goes wrong, I don't panic. I react quickly, methodically, and decisively. My efficiency has been noticed and appreciated, even though I rarely explain where it comes from. It's a remnant of the structure, the drills, the unspoken rules of living in a highly controlled environment. The paradox is that while prison tried to strip away my individuality, it also taught me skills I couldn't have learned elsewhere. Skills that now help me navigate life more effectively than some of my peers who've never faced similar pressure. Some habits are harder to manage, though. Even now, I find myself compartmentalizing emotions more than most. I learned inside that showing weakness could make you a target, so I became reserved, selective about what I reveal. I've had to relearn vulnerability, trust, and patience, but the instincts don't fully leave you. I've come to understand that the goal isn't to erase these habits, but to control and healthily direct them. I use them strategically, not destructively, channeling that heightened awareness into positive outcomes rather than aggression or fear. Reflecting on it all, I realized that survival in prison was about making small moments matter, adjusting your sense of time, and learning how to control what you could in a world where nearly everything else was out of your control. Those lessons have stayed with me, shaping who I am today. I eat more slowly now, I savor things, I enjoy my moments of freedom and peace, and yet, beneath the surface, a part of me remains alert, ready, and unyielding. Prison taught me how to survive, and outside I'm learning how to live, and to live well, while carrying those lessons with me. Story 10. I did almost 7 years and have been out for 2. I'm 35, from Wisconsin. Wisconsin has a law called truth in sentencing. You do 100% of your time. There are multiple head counts where the guards make sure every inmate is accounted for. Every morning at 5 a.m., I felt guilty if I slept past that time. It took me almost 6 months before I could actually sleep past 5. Even now, 6 a.m. feels like sleeping in. This habit taught me punctuality and reliability. I never miss work and always show up on time. I was a drug dealer with no work ethic, sleeping until noon. Ironically, that strict schedule from prison made me more successful than I ever imagined. I was recently recruited by another company with a 150% salary increase. It's nice to see a new tax bracket. In just 2 years, I've become a model parolee. My life is great. I married my wife last September and attended therapy for several conditions that developed during my time in prison. I was diagnosed with general and social anxiety disorders and PTSD. A few months after release, I had a panic attack. I didn't understand what was happening. I was literally paralyzed and terrified. I thought prison had ruined me, but it actually made me a better person in many ways. I am not praising the Wisconsin DOC. Guards dehumanized inmates and treated us like garbage with no hope, constantly saying, "You'll be back," but I won't be back. The system relies on people returning. It's job security for them. They do everything they can to steal your dreams. I chose a different path. Prison forced me to step back and examine my life. I saw who I had hurt, who supported me, and who abandoned me. Around my 3rd year, I committed myself to change. I contemplated ending it myself because my sentence still felt endless. But I decided to become the best human being I could be. I revolted by behaving, teaching myself, and staying positive. Now, my life is amazing. I'm surrounded by people who love and support me. To all the ex-cons and anyone reading this thread, that label is meaningless. We are human beings with feelings. We can change, stay positive, stay hopeful, and never give up. Story 11. Not me, but a guy who worked for me left a mark on my understanding of how deeply prison can shape someone's habits. When things were very busy at work, I would often get carry-out lunch for everyone and bring it back to the office. On one particular day, I noticed something remarkable. While most people were eating at a leisurely pace, chatting, or taking a moment to savor their food, this one guy inhaled a cheeseburger and fries in what seemed like 2 minutes. It was astonishing, almost a blur. Curiosity got the better of me, so I asked him why he ate so quickly. His response hit me harder than I expected. He said, "Well, Nobs Forgma, I spent 7 years in a federal prison. If you didn't eat your meal in 10 minutes, you didn't get anything." That 10 minutes often included the time it took standing in line to get your food. I paused for a moment, taking in the weight of what he just shared. I realized then that what seemed like an odd quirk was actually a survival habit. Every motion, every choice in prison is constrained by rules, scarcity, and the need to protect yourself. Even something as simple as eating becomes a competition and a race. Standing in line wasn't just about waiting your turn, it was about timing, positioning, and making sure you didn't miss your opportunity to eat. 10 minutes was enough to be fed, or enough to go hungry for the day. That urgency carved habits so deeply into his routine that even years later, in a completely free environment, he still ate almost as quickly as he did behind bars. I never said anything to him about it after that. There was no need. The lesson was clear. The habits people develop in prison are not merely quirks. They are adaptations to extreme circumstances. Survival requires speed, efficiency, and sometimes ruthlessness, even in the smallest daily acts. The way he ate a simple meal wasn't just fast. It was deliberate, controlled, and efficient. He had learned to optimize his movements, to minimize wasted time, and to anticipate potential obstacles. Those lessons never really go away. They linger as deeply ingrained behaviors long after release. Watching him that day, I began to reflect on the countless other habits ex-cons must carry with them, often without anyone realizing it. From hypervigilance in public spaces to the instinctive need to conserve every resource, prison molds a person in ways most of us cannot imagine. It's not just about learning to survive a dangerous environment, it's about reshaping your sense of time, priorities, and even what you consider normal behavior. The urgency to finish a meal in 2 minutes may seem trivial to someone who's never been incarcerated, but it's emblematic of a much larger reality in prison. Every second counts, and hesitation can have consequences. I thought about other areas of life where these habits might manifest. Someone who has spent years rushing through meals might also process information differently, make decisions more quickly, or respond to confrontations with instincts honed in high-stakes situations. That same efficiency that served him inside can be both a strength and a challenge outside. On the one hand, it allows for quick thinking and decisive action. On the other hand, it may make slowing down, savoring moments, or adjusting to a more relaxed environment feel unnatural. It also made me consider how deeply personal these adaptations are. No two experiences are exactly alike, and every habit carries with it a story of survival, strategy, and necessity. For this guy, eating fast wasn't just about food, it was about controlling what little agency he had in an environment designed to strip him of control. It was about asserting some small ownership over his life, however constrained that life may have been. That perspective changed how I viewed his actions. What looked like a strange or rude behavior was actually a reflection of resilience and learned discipline. Years later, I still remember that lunch vividly. It became more than just a moment of curiosity. It was a reminder of the unseen challenges people face after incarceration. Habits formed in prison are not always visible to outsiders. They can be subtle, like the speed at which someone eats, or profound, affecting how someone navigates the world. And these habits are often misunderstood. People might see them as eccentricities, impatience, or even rudeness, without recognizing the context that shaped them. I also thought about how society responds to ex-cons. We expect people to reintegrate seamlessly, forgetting that survival in prison requires a set of skills and behaviors that do not simply vanish once the gates open. Eating fast is just one small example. There are countless others. Hyper-awareness in public, difficulty trusting others, careful calculation in every social interaction, and the ability to make split-second decisions in high-pressure situations. These are habits hard-earned under extreme circumstances, and they don't disappear just because someone is back in the free world. That day, as I watched him devour his meal with practiced efficiency, I gained a small but important insight. We can't judge post-prison behavior solely by conventional standards. What may seem excessive or unnecessary is often rooted in years of training for survival in an unforgiving environment. And if anything, these habits deserve recognition, not judgment. They are evidence of resilience, adaptability, and the remarkable ways humans adjust to endure. So yes, he ate a cheeseburger and fries in 2 minutes. but that 2-minute meal told a story that went far beyond lunch. It spoke of 7 years of discipline, adaptation, and survival, and it reminded me of how much we can overlook when we fail to consider the experiences that shape people. I never said anything more to him about it, but I will never forget the lesson that lunch imparted. Story 12. That's something our society rarely talks about. Once these individuals get out, many don't last long before they take their own lives. It's freaking sad. Here's what gets me. You commit a crime, get caught, can't afford a good lawyer, so you go to prison. You serve your time, keep your nose clean, and eventually you get out. You're square with the house, right? Time to start fresh, build a new life, a new future. Nope. You have a publicly available criminal record that instantly disqualifies you from almost any job beyond the lowest rungs of the job market, and even most of those won't hire you. Maybe you lie on the application and get lucky because your workplace doesn't run background checks. If you're on parole, your parole officer may visit your workplace, check in, and speak with your supervisor. Kiss that job goodbye. Okay, so you start your own business. Cool. But don't count on small business loans or government funding. You can't trade securities either, just in case you were dreaming about setting up a hedge fund. Want to live in a decent apartment or rental home in a safe area? Good luck. Rental applications ask about your criminal history, and most places won't let you in. Well, screw this. Thinking about moving to Canada for a fresh start? Sorry. The US, Canada, the UK, and Australia share criminal databases. You can't even go on vacation. At least there's food stamps, welfare, and public housing, right? Well, not always. Depending on the state, you could be barred from these basic social programs. The same goes for federal grants and student loans. You can't get a decent job, can't live in a decent area, and don't have access to ways to improve your life, so what's left? Screw it and go back to selling. And everyone wonders why recidivism rates are through the roof. Story 13. Constantly looking over my shoulder has been, without a doubt, the hardest prison habit for me to break, and honestly, I doubt I ever fully will. It's not just the physical act of being alert all the time, it's the way it reshapes your mind, your expectations, and even how you experience life itself. When you spend time in the system, every moment is measured, every interaction is evaluated, and every sliver of hope is tempered with extreme caution. You learn quickly that nothing is guaranteed. Dates get moved, promises aren't kept, and the smallest flicker of hope often leads to disappointment. The conditioning becomes so deep that it doesn't simply disappear once you walk out of the facility. It stays with you, embedded in your thought patterns, your instincts, and even your relationships. While I was incarcerated, I developed a constant tension between pessimism and what I call cautious optimism. You're taught, often painfully, not to get your hopes up. You wait for court dates, plea deals, or sentencing, only to see your plans shift 50 times before the ink dries on any official paperwork. Each time you think something positive is about to happen, it slips away, and you're forced to recalibrate your expectations. That repeated conditioning trains your mind to avoid attachment to outcomes entirely. You learn that celebrating too soon is dangerous. It can lead to disappointment, frustration, and sometimes even danger in the environment you're in. This mindset becomes so ingrained that it becomes automatic, a lens through which you view every event in life, long after you've been released. I see this most clearly in my personal life. When my wife told me we were pregnant, I already suspected it from her symptoms, but even then, I couldn't fully allow myself to feel excited. In prison, you learn to temper all emotions because expressing too much joy, fear, or anger can make you a target. Those habits linger. So even though I was happy, I couldn't allow myself to get carried away. My brain had been trained to maintain cautious optimism. I had to be sure the pregnancy was progressing safely before I allowed myself to feel the full weight of joy. Even when our daughter was born, the reality of the situation, the full emotional release, didn't hit me until I held her in my arms and knew she was healthy. The cautiousness had become part of me, a permanent filter through which I experienced life. This pattern doesn't just apply to major life events like having a child. It extends to every milestone. Getting engaged, planning a wedding, buying a house, or achieving a personal goal. My wife often tells me she wishes I'd been more outwardly excited about becoming a father. She doesn't always realize that my lack of visible enthusiasm isn't indifference. It's the prison-conditioned habit of not getting my hopes up until there is certainty. For years, this cautious lens has affected how I participate in life. I scan the environment, analyze every detail, and anticipate possible problems before allowing myself to relax. While my wife brings warmth, stability, and love, I still find myself operating under the subconscious rules instilled during my incarceration. The conditioning affects trust as well. In prison, you learn that anyone could be a threat, and trust is a currency you cannot afford to spend freely. That mindset bleeds into post-prison life. Even in safe environments, I sometimes find myself scanning rooms, analyzing behaviors, and categorizing people as threats or safe. It's exhausting and emotionally taxing, yet the habit persists because it kept me alive in a system where naivety could have serious consequences. The skill that once ensured survival now complicates ordinary interactions and makes it difficult to relax fully or enjoy the spontaneity of life outside. While many people assume that adjusting to freedom is a simple matter of leaving the facility, it's far more complicated than that. Prison doesn't just punish your body, it rewires your mind. The hardest habits to break aren't physical, they're psychological. They manifest as hypervigilance, pessimism, cautious optimism, and a relentless need to anticipate disappointment. They shape how you experience happiness, trust, and even love. I have been home for over 7 years now, and I have been with my wife for 6.5. Her presence in my life has been transformative. She motivates me to continue working on myself and to break away from the lingering influence of the system. Yet, despite her love and support, she will never fully know how much joy she brings me because my cautious optimism masks my emotions. The prison habit of constant alertness and tempered hope has left a permanent imprint, one that even the most loving relationships cannot fully erase. The reality is that some prison habits are lifelong. They don't vanish simply because the physical constraints of prison are removed. For me, constant vigilance, pessimism, and cautious optimism are enduring echoes of my time behind bars. They are reminders of a past where hope was a fragile luxury and survival depended on mental fortitude. Breaking these habits is less about elimination and more about learning to coexist with them while striving to live fully in the world outside. Story 14. One of the hardest habits I had to break after leaving prison was my completely altered sense of time. In prison, every minute is regimented, every hour accounted for, and every day is broken into rigid segments. When you live like that for years, it fundamentally changes how you perceive time. And it doesn't just vanish the moment you step outside. I had to relearn what it meant to have unstructured hours, to enjoy moments without calculating how long I could safely linger, and to let life flow without always looking for the next move or the next threat. In prison, you eat fast. You don't savor meals. You inhale them because there's always someone behind you, always a line forming, always the next head count looming. Everyone done time knows what I mean. Those few minutes in the chow hall aren't really yours. Yet somehow, we'd find small ways to stretch time. We'd slow walk back from the chow hall, loitering just enough to feel a few extra moments of freedom outside the walls, pretending we weren't technically breaking the rules. Those tiny fragments of control over your schedule become precious. After release, I realized I was still trying to stretch hours and minutes, even when I didn't need to. I also had to relearn how to enjoy life without hyper-focus. In prison, if you had a snack, you had to fully concentrate on it. No multitasking, no watching TV while eating, no distractions. If there was something decent to watch, you watched it fully and carefully, because moments of pleasure were fleeting and often regulated. Post-release, I found myself still applying that same principle internally, trying to slow down and make hours feel longer, savoring every small moment like I was still under lockdown. Eventually, I had to adapt. Now, I snack while watching a movie, but it took years to untrain my brain from treating every small pleasure as a finite, precious commodity. Another prison habit that was nearly impossible to shake was my constant state of vigilance. In prison, you never fully relax. You are always scanning, listening, categorizing, and predicting. Who is a threat? Who is reliable? Who could hurt you if given the chance? These skills keep you alive behind bars, but they don't just disappear when you walk out the gate. Even now, years later, I react to confrontations more quickly, decisively, and efficiently than most people around me. I can assess a tense situation in seconds and pull back just in time, but the muscle memory of being constantly prepared for violence never fully fades. It's a double-edged sword. It keeps me alert and self-protective, but it also makes ordinary situations, like arguments at work or crowded spaces, feel far more stressful than they should. Even social habits carry over. In prison, you quickly learn not to consolidate enjoyable things because if you do, you might lose them. You eat your snack in isolation. You watch that episode of a show fully, or you don't watch it at all. You compartmentalize everything. Food, conversation, relaxation, because combining pleasures is risky or frowned upon, and the small moments of comfort are all you have. After prison, I noticed I still struggle to multitask pleasure. I don't binge watch television while eating meals, and I still have to consciously remind myself it's safe to mix enjoyment because my instincts still operate as though I'm behind bars. It took years to realize that, outside prison, I can actually let myself enjoy multiple things at once without consequence. Even the most mundane things carry traces of prison conditioning. Standing in a crowded room, I find myself scanning faces, memorizing movements, and predicting behavior. I position myself strategically wherever I sit, making sure I can leave quickly if needed. I pay attention to everyone's conversations, not just the ones at my own table. Even the simple act of a waiter interrupting me mid-meal can feel jarring because it breaks my internal rhythm, the rhythm I learned to survive. The cumulative effect of all these habits is subtle but profound. I have a good job now, friends I respect, and a stable life with my wife, yet the imprint of prison remains in my reactions, my thought patterns, and my instincts. I've learned to rein in some of these behaviors, to adjust my perception of time, to enjoy moments without over-analyzing them, and to relax enough to trust that danger is no longer constant. But other habits, constant vigilance, cautious optimism, hyper-focus on small pleasures, remain. Breaking these habits is not just about convenience or comfort, it's about reclaiming your humanity. Prison teaches you survival, but it doesn't teach you how to live fully outside its walls. The hardest habit to break for me was that constant sense of calculated anticipation, always watching, always ready, always waiting for something to go wrong. That conditioning doesn't end at the gate. It lingers for years, shaping your reactions, your choices, and even your enjoyment of life. And maybe, in some ways, it never completely leaves you. But slowly, with time, support, and patience, you learn to bend those habits toward life rather than survival. You can still be cautious without being paralyzed, vigilant without being paranoid, and savor your moments without feeling like they might be taken away. The process is long, it's exhausting, and it's ongoing, but it's the closest thing to freedom you can have after doing time. Story 15. Not me, but a guy who used to work for me had a habit that really stuck from his time in prison. When our workplace got busy, I would often order carry-out lunch for everyone and bring it back. Most people ate at a normal pace, chatting and enjoying their meals, but this one guy would devour a cheeseburger and fries in literally 2 minutes. I remember watching him once and thinking, how can anyone eat that fast? Curious, I finally asked him why he ate so quickly. He looked at me dead seriously and said, well, I spent 7 years in a federal prison. If you didn't finish your meal in 10 minutes, you didn't get anything. That 10 minutes often included the time it took just to stand in line and get your food. That one statement explained so much about his behavior. In prison, meals weren't just about eating, they were a race against the clock, a survival skill. Eat too slowly, and you literally go hungry. Over time, that urgency becomes instinct, a hardwired habit that doesn't just disappear when you leave. Even years after being released, he still carried that habit with him. It wasn't just about speed, it was about efficiency, precision, and a kind of quiet vigilance. When he ate, he focused entirely on the meal in front of him. No distractions, no chit-chat, no savoring the moment. It was a habit that made sense inside the walls of a prison, but looked strange, almost mechanical, in the outside world. He told me later that he tried to slow down, but his body and mind had been trained for years to move fast and stay alert. Even now, in social situations where most of us would casually enjoy a meal, he instinctively scans the environment, eats quickly, and finishes before anyone else. It's not rudeness. It's a deeply ingrained habit of survival. This story really drove home for me how the hardest prison habits to break aren't always obvious. They aren't just things like routines or chores, they're survival mechanisms, instincts that helped you get through harsh conditions. And for many ex-cons, those habits stay with them long after release, shaping the way they live, work, and even eat. Story 16. Prison changes you in ways you don't fully realize until you're out. Even 2 years after my release, I still carry the weight of aggressive posturing. That's what prison is. Constant hypervigilance, and perhaps worse, the relentless need to appear indifferent. You could be sitting with your friends, laughing, or watching TV, when the slightest misstep or a sudden movement could shift the entire mood of the room in an instant. Every emotion you show has to be instantly buried, and at a moment's notice, you have to be booted and suited. Sometimes, I'd return to my unit and see blood smeared on the walls from a fight I had missed. You didn't look at it, eyes forward, indifferent. Emotion is weakness. Even when panic gripped me secretly, I had to bury it and act like a cold jerk. I got into one fight. We pounded each other in the gym area, and if you judged by others' reactions, it was like nothing was happening. Many quietly walked away, while others stood there, emotionless. Had it gone wrong for me, I could have been offed in front of 250 people, and nobody would have done a crap. That is true loneliness, the kind most people in the outside world cannot imagine. Screw it. Even when I ran a high fever at night, in a cramped cell with 6 bunks, I could have died in my sleep. The guards would only have noticed at the count. There were 12 guards on duty for 1,500 inmates. Think about that. If someone wanted to mess with you, you'd be hamburger meat before a guard arrived. That was just the reality. Tension was constant. Respect for everyone was non-negotiable. You stayed alert, jacked, and walked with your shoulders squared. In the weight area, I've seen John Cena-looking, swastika-tatted Aryan men politely ask Terry Crews-looking black power guys for weights, and the same respect was returned. Simple as that. Your fortune depended on your back and your words. Surprisingly, this created an oddly smooth system. Once you earned your bones, your respect, life moved like clockwork. Friction was minimal because everyone knew the smallest spark could ignite an inferno. I could tell countless stories, but the point is this: raw, genuine brute value has no currency outside prison. People scoff at you if you're the size of their thigh. I get cut off in grocery store lines. People glare from across the room. All of that crap behavior could have gotten you hurt in prison, and it's incredibly hard to leave it behind. I'm an educated white kid from a rural area, and I was thrown into a metropolitan prison. Before prison, I had no aggression in me. My wife, who has stood by me through it all, says I'm still gentle and kind, but my prison mannerisms linger. She constantly reminds me not to make intense eye contact, not to cross my arms so often. It's subliminal, and I'm slowly improving, but it has been one of the hardest habits to shake. Moral of the story: don't go to prison, kids. One poor decision can change your life forever. Aggressive posturing is the hardest habit to break after leaving prison. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up, subscribe, and hit the bell icon so you never miss an update.